Northern Eye, followed by Andres Valdez, and then Joseph Torres.
Yes. Councilman, Councilwoman, I appreciate being here tonight. I stand firmly, solidly against the police brutality, and I am still fighting and wanting to see Ray Schultz finally retire or leave, whatever he decides to do, and I just wonder why is he still not moving. I'm just appalled about that. I wished he would leave like he was intending to. Now, the one thing that I really feel strong about is that if anything should happen, that Schultz should leave, it would be a blessing, and it would also be a chance to celebrate. So because of that, I'm feeling strong that he is needing to leave as soon as possible. Now, the police brutality is getting better, and I know the things have not developed any worse than what it already had, and I'm glad that this hasn't escalated. That's what I'm really proud of, and that I believe that because we have made our voices heard, I believe that that is the reason why things have curtailed, and I really appreciate that. I think that that is wonderful, and that it should stay low-key as it is, and I'm hoping that our voice has made a difference, and I believe it has. Thank you very much. I appreciate all your work. Thank you.
Andres Valdez, Joseph Torres.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilors, Andres Valdez, Executive Director of New Mexico Casinos United. Thank you, Councilor Winter and Jones, for presenting your O-1351, which is the suspension of the Police Oversight Commission. However, the suspension of the Police Oversight Commission must include all of its components. It doesn't sound that you can, doesn't make sense that you can actually take the police oversight ordinance and suspend part of it. If you're going to suspend part of it, you have to suspend all of it. It would be like cutting off the head of a body and expecting the body to function without the head. So I'd like to support the suspension of the POC, but the whole thing, because it's going to be a skewed process. How can you only do part of it? And granted, Vecinos United has worked very hard in creating the Police Oversight Commission. Right from the beginning, we asked for one that would be independent from the city government, one that would be elected by the people, one that would have final authority. That was not granted to us. It was our loss. You know, we've had to experience the kind of Police Oversight Commission we have now, because we were not listened to. We hope we're listened to this time, and I do support the suspension, but the whole suspension of the whole process. Thank you.
Joseph Torres. Welcome.
Thank you. Mr. President, distinguished councilors, I don't have any pre-written statements tonight. I just wanted to present two words to you that you probably don't get. You probably don't get too often, and they're the words "thank you." I just wanted to thank you guys and ladies, gentlemen and ladies, for your efforts and your work. And obviously, there's a lot of very complex problems and challenges that we face. And as we proceed in this decade and we move towards 2020 into the next decade, my heart's desire and my prayers are that we continue to work cohesively together, and with that synergy that we can build, that we can solve some of our problems. And I just wanted to thank you so much again for your efforts, and I just wanted to offer up a blessing tonight and ask ask that our great Lord would protect us. So, Father, I just thank you for the city council members. I ask that you would bless them, you would give them great wisdom, and help them, Lord, to make wise decisions both privately and publicly. And we surrender all these things to you. This is your city, a city of lights, and we thank you for this in the name of your Holy Son.
Thank you, sir. Silvio Delangelo, followed by Lorenzo Pino.
Mr. President, councilors, you read my emails on a bunch of things, including the latest ordinance. Mayor Berry, as depicted in six, is ultimately responsible for everything, but, and he controls the media. That's the real sad problem. We had a union that had a protest last week, was never covered by the media because he controls it, and he assumes people are stupid and they'll believe anything you want. And Councilor Harris, I don't know why you even agreed to be a pawn for him to try to cut short the early voting. I mean, that was embarrassing. And then we read that the contractors who donated $15,000 to the mayor is suing now for being able to allow them to pay to play, and that's a perception of pay to play. I read old 1341 or 51 and carefully, and you don't really want to improve the situation. All you're doing is taking the people out of the process and you're replacing them with hearing officers or administrative people. It's a scam, really. If you don't cut out the entire process, you're not accomplishing a darn thing. Except, and we have some POC members here, and they should be outraged with it. I mean, if you're going to suspend it, suspend the entire thing, not just them, the citizens that are supposed to represent them. I mean, what's happening here is typical of a third world corrupt city, and you seem to be very happy with this. And I've said already, if you stand by it and condone corruption and lying, you're no better than the folks that do it. Read the Eye on Albuquerque, read Joe Monahan, read other sources in the journal, and you might learn something. Thank you very much.
Lorenzo Pino, followed by Benjamin Trujillo, and Javier Benavides. And if your name is called, if you come, you're welcome to sit in the front row here for the next speaker. So this is Lorenzo Pino, followed by Benjamin Trujillo, Javier Benavides. If y'all will make your way down. Thank you. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Fellow councilors, thanks for your time and service. It is appreciated. Well, I'm here to talk with you about concerns minimum wage that the citizens of Albuquerque voted on and passed. One problem still exists.
Council President and councilors, it's obvious that 2 minutes isn't enough time to address all these issues. If we had a public access station with live public access, these people could have a program where they could invite you either individually or collectively and talk with you for almost an hour. Instead, they are given 2 minutes here, 2 minutes there, and then sent off to some other board. I myself personally don't want to be down here, but due to the actions of the Perry Berry administration, I am here before you could turn me off if you didn't like what I was speaking on public access. Again, you can't do anything in 2 minutes. You can't address the police issue, budget issues, this issue with Jefferson Junior High. I myself personally drove through was driving through a school zone on Candelaria many years ago. The speed limit 15 miles an hour. A woman in front of me killed a child who just stepped off the curb. It wasn't her fault. The sun was in her eyes. I'm sure the carbon monoxide levels on Candelaria are much higher than would be if there was a loop on Jefferson. But again, what can you say in 2 minutes? I'm glad that they're doing all these studies. And again, watching the circus that's going on in the courtroom in Sandoval County, I believe, maybe we should ankle bracelet our police force. That way there'll be no question as to their whereabouts on certain nights. And it goes to show you that the dirty laundry at the police department is no different from the rest of our laundry. And that these actions that they make take place look like Mr. Rogers. again, we need a public access where people can voice their concerns in a decent amount of time, not in 2 minutes in front of the council, which, you know, I don't know if council wants to really hear any of it. And I thank council for bringing me before you on the vote, and departed Councilman Stu Cook. Thank you.
Henry Chavez, Gabriel Ubayas, and Mike Gomez.
Honorable President Winters and Honorable City Councilors, I'm here to give voice to the development of the 7th and Iron property, and I'm very grateful to the city for helping us.
Okay, New Mexico, the worst for child well-being in the U.S. and possibly the world. Heard that on the news here this morning. Albuquerque, you probably don't know this, worst for job growth in the U.S. That's another wonderful thing. And then, of course, the Leo Chavez trial, APD, a disgusting disgrace with all of the internal affairs, but this doesn't mean the IA, this means internal affairs with family members, right? And guess what? It's all under the Republicans' time in office. Isn't that just wonderful? The Republicans' time in office. And so sad, because things could be better if some of the Republicans on this council would make it better. And then Miss Trudy Jones, that's great, you know, it was good for you to bring up that POC thing, and I kind of thought, wow, that's kind of funny, you know, because you never really cared about anybody that didn't have any money, you know, that wasn't in your district, that wasn't a friend of Barry. And I thought, wow, this is something different, you know, maybe you care. And then I started reading more about it, and no, it's all a scam. You know, you want to change this ordinance 01351 and not have any oversight over the internal investigators at all. You want to let them run wild, just like the DA does, you know, who they can do anything they want to. Well, it says there that you wanted to take care of all of the POC. Well, the IRO is part of the POC ordinance. So if you want to sustain everything and stop everything, stop them too. Let's cut them all out. Ms. Hammer, her cronies, everybody. If you want to stop everybody, stop them, but just don't stop part of them for your advantage and not the citizens.
All right, there are no announcements tonight. We'll move to the consent agenda. Councilors, any changes to the consent agenda?
Mr. President,
Councilor Bennett.
I'd like to remove item A.
Item A. Councilor Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move approval of the consent agenda for the exception of item A.
The motion is second for approval of the consent agenda as amended. Those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Those opposed, no. Motion passes. Councilor Bennett.
Thank you,
Councilor
Mr.
Jones.
President. This is O51, suspending the operation of the Police Oversight Commission pending review of the city's police oversight process. And I move to pass.
Second.
Motion is second for approval. Councilor Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we have a few folks time to speak, but I'd like to clarify some things and talk to the administration, Mr. Wheeler, regarding an amendment that I tried to get for tonight. And you just need to explain it to me if you can. There's been some issues in the past and forward about not only suspending the PLC, but also suspending any work, not work from the IRO, but if say there was a complaint that came in. And so I was going to do an amendment that basically says that if there was a complaint that came in, that a person had the option to either have the RO hear it or hold on to that complaint until the POC oversight process was reviewed, and then that complaint would go to the new, whatever comes out of the process Councilor Garduny and I are working on. And I was told by the administration, because of some some union issues that wasn't possible. Can you explain that, please?
Mr. President, Councilor Winter, there are actually two problems with that. One of them is in the standard collective bargaining agreement. There's a provision that says that all POC issues have to be resolved within 90 days. Additionally, there's a provision in the existing ordinance that says that all complaints, citizen complaints, have to be filed within 90 days from the date of the incident. So with those two time constraints in there, it wouldn't work out to just suspend it indefinitely.
Mr. President, the concern that I had is there anything else that we can do? Because if somebody files a complaint and they do not feel comfortable taking it through the IRO without the PLC being reviewed and work, isn't there anything we can do to make that happen or not?
Mr. President, Councilor Winter, not without renegotiating our collective bargaining agreements.
Mr. President, okay, thank you.
Councilor Earl Jones.
Mr. President, and Councilor Winter, does that include if this bill has a discrete timeline? And that's the part that I didn't understand, is if there was a suspension for a time definite, does that breach the union contracts?
Councilor Winter
Do you know?
or Mr. Rule?
Mr. President, Councilor Arnold Jones, under the existing ordinance and under the existing contracts, it would have to be resolved within 90 days. So I suspect that the council has the public policy option to draft an ordinance or draft a provision that says that as long as it could be resolved in less than 90 days, or the suspension of it is less than 90 days, I suppose that would work out.
Thank you.
Councilor Bennett?
Mr. Wheeler, are all the positions filled at this point on the commission? No.
Mr. President, Councilor Benton, no.
One vacancy. What I heard.
One vacancy.
Would be District 5, am I correct?
And a quick question. I was trying to recollect, but it seems like we have had, let's say in the last half of the year, 3 new commissioners, is that right?
I wouldn't be able to address that.
I just saw 4 fingers of 4 in the last 6 months, new commissioners. Thank you.
We'll go to our public speakers. Thank you, Mr. Rule. David Cameron, Richard Shine, Jonathan Siegel, Andres Valdez. And please make your way down to the front if you'd like to sit in the front row there and do the next speaker. Mr. Cameron, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. President, councilors. I speak to this proposed ordinance as the chairperson of the Police Oversight Commission. I'm here to tell you that despite reports to the contrary, we do continue to do our work, and I think do it well. We have, I'd like to give you an overview of some of the accomplishments that we've made in the past year so that you get that side of the story. We have a cooperative relationship with the Albuquerque Police Department so that when we notice a problem with some standard operating procedures, we can make a suggestion. They listen, they often make changes. We have hired a highly competent independent review officer who has a great staff and now has an analyst, which is a position we requested. You helped us get. We're thankful for that. We have made amendments over the past year to our own rules to make our process more transparent to the public. We have a long-term planning committee that is now doing its work as never before. It is doing research on best practices of citizen oversight across the country, paying attention to policing trends. We have a new public outreach committee that's taken on the responsibility of better informing the public about the work that we do. We have a more timely and thorough airing of and response to our citizen complaints, which really is the heart of our work, and we're doing that well. We have a better access to APD investigative reports concerning police shootings than ever before, and that was at our request. We are volunteer citizens. We're doing our best. We've had a steep learning curve. We've made some mistakes. But I think it's a failed strategy to focus on the mistakes instead of the accomplishments. We stand ready to do your work, do the work as you directed. We certainly support inquiry into making our work better, but we believe that it would be unnecessary and counterproductive to suspend us at this time.
Mr. Cameron, question for you. Councilor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Cameron, thank you for the work you do. And I'm proud to say that, I know you, and that you were so kind to be on the commission when I asked you. One of the questions I had was, does it make sense to suspend part of the process and not the entire process? Does it make sense to not continue with the POC as configured today? And I guess ultimately is, if the POC was to continue, wouldn't it be a message to the public that we are still wanting to hear your concerns? And yes, there is going to be a review of the process, but that's not to say that the process is absolutely wrong. Would you say that?
Mr. President, Councilor Gardner, I think that what you have seen is that by suspending our work, you open a can of worms with the police union, with other aspects of the work we do that would be like teaching on a thread that you never know when it's going to quit unraveling. And I think that for us to continue our work, I mean, why suspend us now? We've learned how to do our job. And so we've taken advantage of that learning that we've done, and we are continuing to improve. And I really can't speak highly enough about our independent review officer and her investigative team, and with our analysts now. I think that we are really honing the process, and to listen to a vocal few who would suspend us indefinitely or suspend us completely, I just think it's not the way to go.
Thank you,
Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for coming, and thanks for serving. Do you feel that you and your committee are following the absolute word of the ordinance the way it's written today?
As best we can, yes.
And do you feel a desire on the committee to change those rules and to give the POC more jurisdiction and more say in how these hearings are held?
Well, I think we would vary from commissioner to commissioner on how we would answer that. I think we are, contrary to what some people think, we are interested in being transparent in our process and making what we do as open as possible, but we also have to follow our current ordinance in how we do that. And so, yes, I think there's room for improvement in rewriting the ordinance to make our process more transparent and to the citizens. And so I think, to a person, we're all open to that change, those changes. But we can't make them. That's your job.
Thank
But
you.
as far as
That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
But as far as our, like having us decide what punishment to mete out, I mean, I'm not qualified. I would need training to do that, and I don't have the time or the inclination to take that training. So I don't want to be the one to give out the punishment for SRO infractions. SOP, SRO, standing room on.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Cameron, you have direct access to the analyst that was recently hired?
Direct access.
You can call, ask questions, you can gather
Oh, sure.
Sure.
We try not to micromanage the IRO's office. Currently, the analyst is at work. Her first duties have been to improve the efficiency of the IRO's office at the IRO's request. And so her time has been taken up, and it's a part-time position. So initially, her time is taken up with improving that, and we have seen an improvement in the efficiency and effectiveness of the IRO's office. And so we will get into more analytical analysis of data as time progresses.
Do you see a change? Do you have more information, more interaction, you feel like?
Well, not from the analysts. That is a change that has taken place over this past year through our own function, our own requests, we have gained more access. And as the analyst gets up and running, we will be getting more reports about trends in policing in the community. So that'll make a difference.
And do you know if all the commissioners have taken advantage of some of the training that was?
As far as I know, yeah. I mean, at the last, the MGT report that came out, that woke up those who were, I mean, well, I came on in May. The MGT report was before that, and I'm, with one exception, the longest serving person on the commission at this point.
Okay, Councilor Arnold Jones.
Mr. President, Mr. Cameron, thank you. I'm also kind of new, and so my job is to listen, and even the people who are hardest to listen to may not be wrong.
Right.
And given that, what history review I have done of the POC, you've admired the process, procedural process, not, and truly are quite unwelcoming to the public. I'm trusting that since you are new, that is improving. So given that we're looking at possibly suspending all activity until we can figure this out, you're sitting there in the trenches. What would you do? What would you recommend that would make a difference?
In what way?
In what way? So clearly, the process, from my view, is not working. It's not working well, but you think where you're sitting that you can make it work. What else can you do? I'm concerned about the amount of time that it takes for people to be before you. I'm actually concerned about the way they have been treated and dismissed even. Is it appropriate? I don't know because I'm not sitting in your shoes. So do we have a structural problem in the way that this commission has been set up?
Mr. President, Ms. Arnold Jones, you know, if you're referring to the incident last December, 7 months ago, that I would count as one of our mistakes when we ill-advisedly cut off public comment. The very next action we took the next month was to apologize for that action we took as a commission, so that we count as one of our mistakes that we have learned from. As you find, to do your work, you cannot have unlimited public comment, as some would like. So we do limit public comment in terms of time, but we do not limit public comment in terms of content. That was, other than that one time, that we've apologized for, and still that is what comes up in the media and on those who have complaints about us.
And if I might, and you weren't there for that.
I was there, oh yeah.
You were there, okay.
I sure was.
So do we have an additional problem, and I appreciate those comments, is there an additional problem, or are we on the right track in getting the data that is necessary for you to render a recommendation?
I feel we are definitely on the right track. I mean, there are members of the public who would say no. A vocal few who would say that's not the case, but I think I speak for my commissioners in saying that we have made improvements. There are improvements to make, but we're on the right track, absolutely.
Councilor Bender, let's continue with our public comment. Councilor Bender.
How many more do we have to?
We had 5 or 6.
Okay, and just since we have the chairman here, and I appreciate your service. So I mean, right, I think what we're faced with, at least council is faced with tonight, and hopefully we don't make a mistake, is it's an all or nothing right now. At least we're going to determine the right time as far as we can tell that there would not be work done. I just wanted to ask about, you talked about how you're educating yourselves. You're working towards that, and I asked the question of how many new commissioners were there, and quite a few.
Absolutely.
Which really is always a cause for hope, if you will, for a better future when people are new blood that's willing to come in and serve. So again, we talked about a plan commission as well. You're right up there with them, obviously. But in addition to hearing cases, you're doing these other things as well. So you're doing actually self-initiated studies on
correct.
correct?
That's correct.
I just need to
it is important to note that we are, since December, there's certainly 4 new commissioners who should not be painted with the same brush that I should be painted with.
Commissioner, thank you.
Okay.
We'll go to Richard Shine and Jonathan Siegel, Reyes Valdez. Well,
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, City Councilors, my name is Richard Shine. I'm currently a commissioner on the Police Oversight Commission. In the last 10 months, the majority of the membership of the POC has been replaced, and as a consequence, there's been an enormous amount of change at the POC and how it conducts its business. And change can cause a lot of stress and resentment in some of those affected. What kind of changes has the POC instituted? First, over the strenuous public objection of the attorney for the police union, the POC adopted a change in its rules so that all officer-involved shooting cases are brought by the IRO directly to the full commission for a televised public hearing. Another major change is that each of the citizens' complaints against individual APD officers is discussed in full by the IRO, the commissioners, and police officials at the televised public hearing. If you pass this bill suspending the POC, there will be no more public airing of the facts and details of officer-involved shootings or citizens' complaints against individual police officers. Any issues raised by the shootings or by the citizens' complaints will be resolved in private by the chief of police and the IRO, 2 full-time city employees, without any civilian oversight. I would respectfully suggest to you that that is not in the public interest. There is no question that the current ordinance establishing the POC is, in my opinion, seriously defective and will hopefully be improved by you through the legislative process. But that process does not require the termination of all civilian oversight of the police department during the interim period. For the next several months during your legislative process, I would suggest to you that civilian oversight, even civilian oversight under a defective ordinance, is better than no civilian oversight at all. And its elimination now, for the first time since the 1990s, is not in the public interest.
thank you, Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Shine, what would you change about the ordinance?
Well, there are a number of policy concerns that the City Council has to address. For example, to begin with, the issue of officer-involved shootings. Right now, under the ordinance, the Commission and the IRO are only authorized to monitor those shootings, monitor the investigations of those shootings.
And Mr. Shine, what would you change about that?
Well, one of the policy issues that the City Council will have to address will be whether to adopt the amendments that have been, for example, put into place by Chicago and New York City, in which the IRO has the power to investigate the police shootings rather than the internal affairs section of the police department. But that's a decision for you to make as a City Council 6 months from now or a year from now, whenever you decide to amend the ordinance. That's just one of many policy decisions excuse me, that you'll have to make. For example, in a number of civilian oversight organizations around the country, the civilian oversight organization makes a recommendation on discipline to the chief of police, but the chief of police has the final determination. We, at this point, don't have that power under the ordinance. That's for you to decide whether you want to amend it. That's different than what would happen now in the interim before you actually amend the ordinance.
Excuse me, Mr. Shine, are you aware that that's in violation of the collective bargaining agreement?
Say it again?
Are you do you understand that is in violation of the collective bargaining agreement with the police union?
That would be something that you'd have to address when you amend the ordinance. I'm not advocating that, Councilor Jones. I'm just saying it's one of the policy calls that you have to make.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Shine. I just thought I'd ask you what you would change about it.
No, I'm saying, I preceded it by saying these are some of the policy considerations that the City Council will have to address. At this point, I don't have any set of recommendations. We were in the midst of doing a study of 30 cities as to how they're organized and what their ordinances say, and based upon that study, we were going to try to formulate a position for the POC, and POC would hopefully then make recommendations to the City Council on what amendments to make. But if you suspend us, then that obviously will stop.
Thank you, Mr. Shine.
Councilor.
Mr. Shine, thank you for pointing out that you're vis-a-vis this issue of how we revise the ordinance, you would be a recommending body, I think. I don't know whether there's, if that role is defined, I would ask our own attorneys that. And you probably know the answer to that as well, but I think it's important to point out that these are council decisions and that,
Absolutely.
and that in 2011, the administration and council accepted a study by NGT. That's 2 years ago now. I'm sure you've read that study, and what are your thoughts on that? Does that move us forward, Mr. Shine, or is there a lot missing out of that study?
There are several recommendations in that study, Mr. President, Commissioner Benton, that have not been implemented. One of them, I spoke to you when you were looking at the budget. One of their recommendations was to have an additional investigator authorized for the IRO so that there would not have to be any citizen complaint investigations conducted by the internal affairs people. So they would all be done by the independent IRO.
So
But that didn't.
in the NGT.
That was to implement one of the MGT recommendations. But there are a whole series of recommendations like that could still be implemented. But that's just setting aside the issue of what the council decides to, how the council decides at some later date how to amend the ordinance. And I would emphasize that we do not, under the ordinance, the POC has no power, no requirement to make recommendations to the city council. The long-term planning committee thought it would be helpful to the city council for us to do the 30-city study, and through that develop information to benefit the council, so the council will know what's going on in other cities around the country of comparable size. The cities we used were the MGT cities that they focused on.
All right, well, thank you. I think it's an important point that you are doing work other than just your hearings. So we suspend the hearings, you commissioners are in the trenches, and I know you've got the ones to show for it. I appreciate your forthrightness and basically apologizing for that one night that didn't work out too well. But I also appreciate the fact that you're trying to get some work done in the meantime and looking at best practices around the country. We have counselors, a body here, who is of a great extent our creation, at least in terms of the nominating process, and it could be a resource while we go through this, as opposed to, all right, everybody go home.
Mr. President, if I could respond to Commissioner Bennett, I would say, and I've been alerted by Mr. Wheeler that I can't really talk about what happened last December because it's under litigation at the moment, but I would say this. In December, I made a mistake. Not a legal mistake, but a mistake nevertheless. I made that clear that I made a mistake in the January hearing. I would suggest to you that every one of us should make a
Mr. President, Mr. Wheeler, do you want to stop? Please.
Well, I was just going to make the observation. I'm not going to further discuss what happened in December or January.
You can continue, Mr. Shea.
Pardon me?
Councilor John.
I'm just concerned about the livelihood of the city.
As a sponsor of this legislation, I'd like to say, Mr. Shine, this has nothing to do with what happened at that meeting. It's a question of whether we want to suspend this body until the new ordinance is rewritten and done. So I think, although I appreciate very much your defending yourself and what you're saying, I don't believe that that's irrelevant in what this body is looking at right now. Thank you, sir.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think the commissioner was responding to a question, and I don't think there's anything wrong with just acknowledging, the mistake that was made. Certainly, we appreciate you doing that. But I think to that extent, if there's anything else, Mr. Shine.
No, just obviously, as Councilor Jones indicated, my only observation is certainly one doesn't suspend the organization because of someone's mistake on that organization. That's just not appropriate.
Okay, Councilor Gardino and then Councilor Harris.
Commissioner Shine, thank you for your service. And we understand what the ordinance is asking for, the change is asking for, that is suspension of the POC. I would imagine that you and other commissioners that I've spoken to aren't adverse or opposed to So I want people to know that none of the commissioners, at least not to me, have ever said, you know what, the best thing you could do is suspend the POC and everything will be taken care of. Because that sounds like we're saying then that why not just suspend it forever? And I think that's the wrong thing to do. Citizen police complaints will continue to come through, and I think we need to respectfully look at those complaints, even though it may not be under the most optimal situation. And hopefully, in the future, the POC will function in a different way that is more responsive, more transparent, all of those things. But for the present, I think to suspend a board, a commission, I think is wrong. It's wrong because it's not that commission's fault that there are some things that need to be worked on. And the original ordinance asks that that happen. It does not say the POC should be reviewed, but it should be suspended. It just says the POC should be reviewed. You know, I forget if there's a timeline or not, but every 5 years or something like that. But there is nothing in the ordinance that speaks to the suspension of the POC. So, I don't know if you want to speak to that or not.
I would just say, Mr. President, Commissioner Garduno, I have said here publicly, and I've also said at the hearings, that I and most other commissioners welcome the review of the ordinance by this city council through the task force procedure. And there are a number of major policy issues that I think this city council has to address that have now become clearer as we progress through this in the last 10 or 15 months, or about 10 months actually. And so I fully endorse that notion, and as I indicated in my statement, as defective as the ordinance is, however, I think the current civilian oversight of the police department and the work of the IRO is better than none at all.
Councilor Harris.
And I don't really have much to say. I just wanted to point out that I do not support this legislation, and I appreciate your service to the police report.
Thank you.
Councilor Bismarck.
Well, I just, you know, I think Commissioner Shine was just in the press saying we all make mistakes when he was interrupted. I don't think there was anything said that didn't interfere in anything. But I want to thank you for coming down, and I think it's courageous of you to be willing to speak to us.
Not to reiterate that, Mr. Shine, you all have, from my experience, you all have offered some great suggestions and certainly have acknowledged the, you know, the defectiveness of the ordinance right now. And you've been apologetic. I mean, we all make mistakes, and this council's made mistakes. Also, yeah, we probably don't come to terms with it as quick as you all probably did. But again, you have every right to be here. I think and all the commissioners, your suggestions and ideas, would obviously be very welcome. I think what's important right now in the legislation that is, you know, beyond this is truly to hear from the public on those kinds of reforms. And I know you support that. And the challenge is, no matter what we say right now and your suggestions, it's important that we hear from the public and go through this process to be able to truly implement some reforms. And I think we all agree that it's important that there is citizen oversight and that we fix this ordinance also.
President Lewis, I would say this, that we I'm chairman of at the moment anyway, I'm chairman for the long-term planning committee. And we have already, in our hearings, raised the issue of the ordinance, what kind of amendments are required, sought public comment. So far, we haven't got any public comment on it. But but the point is, if you let the commission continue its work, I think it will be beneficial for the city and for the city council and the public to give the commission and this long-term planning committee the opportunity to develop information from the 30-city study and from testimony in front of the long-term planning committee and ultimately the POC as to recommendations that will supplement the work of the task force and add to the work of the task force and benefit the city council and the public.
And you all know, the ordinance. I appreciate the knowledge of the ordinance and the clarity that you all have given. And also some of the suggestions that were made, clarifying what the MGT report suggested. Councilor Harris and I wanted to take some steps to make sure that you had the information that you needed. As far as the MGT recommendations on the analyst and the training and that information, I think we've made some good steps there. And I think it's been investigating some of those other things that we need to implement. So let's go on to the next speaker.
Thank you.
Mr. Siegel, followed by Andreas Valdez.
Good evening. Jonathan Siegel. I'm another police commissioner, as you're aware. I speak tonight, though, as an individual citizen. I thoroughly endorse a thoughtful and complete review of the ordinance as previously approved by this council. Ordinance review will be difficult and will take time, as was seen in council's inconclusive consideration of the MGT report of 2011. Ordinance review represents the increased candor and openness expected by the public. However, suspending public civilian hearings is a step in the opposite direction, in my opinion. Therefore, I come to recommend against suspension of the POC. As our Chair Cameron expressed, our POC members are a diverse cross-section of citizens. We do not vote in unanimity. The messiness, in fact, to my mind, is a symptom of institutional health. We do ask pesky questions, and we're attempting to move forward, or at least we were until this legislation was proposed. We formed an outreach committee, as was noted, which is in the process of developing several programs and documents. Such a committee never previously existed. The Long Range Planning Committee has been reinvigorated, now has adopted a 4-page agenda of items to be addressed, an agenda for which we solicited public input, as you heard earlier. Seems to me you should be applauding our vigor and urging us to look further to ask harder questions, exhorting vigorous oversight. Instead, you suggest a suspension of work. We're joined by comparable civilian oversight commissions across the country, and our city would be badly out of step to move away from such oversight, even temporarily. I have talked many times with people who have lost family members to police shootings. They cannot be consoled. Not by me, not by any commission. Their loss is just unfathomable. I've also spoken with more police officers than I can count. May I finish the sentence?
Go ahead and proceed.
The vast majority of the police officers are astonishingly good people who endorse oversight because they only benefit by proven review. Citizen oversight, in fact, strengthens public confidence, and the officers who I've spoken with know this, as does the public at large, and I thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Any questions? Councilor Garcia.
Thank you, Commissioner Siegel. Thank you for your service. I also would ask you more or less the same question, but I also wanted to applaud you bringing up the fact that the majority of police are good public servants. And the whole idea for having a police oversight commission is to ferret out the mistakes that have been made, the intentional misgivings on the part of some of the officers, and that's the main thing. I think that you're saying that is important, and I think when you said that we can't console folks who have lost loved ones, you're right. But we have to be honest and be truthful to some of the words that they've given us in a public situation. Maybe we can hear some of those. But I think, as you say, we should continue that process.
Mr. President, Councilor Garduno, if I might respond, to me the main issue tonight is that the only piece of the ordinance you're talking about taking away is the civilian portion. I find that startling, and I think it may be very unsettling to our city.
Thank you. Andreas Valdez, followed by Nora Benaya, and then Mike Gomez.
Mr. President, Commissioners, Andres Valdez, New Mexico Vecinos United. Councilors, with all the improvement the commissioners are trying to make, the results that officers, all officers, and their police brutality is still being exonerated. So the results are the same. And I guess, and when my free speech rights were violated by the commission, yes, they apologized for that. And by the way, it should help my case. Nevertheless, what also transpired that kind of shows where this commission, or that we really need to suspend the whole process, is that the commission supported the 7-year conflict of interest that the POC chairwoman Linda Martinez had. You know, that kind of also shows, you know, it was not that just my free speech rights were violated. These guys just don't seem to have it together in terms of what creates a conflict of interest. And the commission still suffers from an appearance of impropriety. And an appearance of impropriety is all that's necessary to constitute a violation of the law. The POC, through the ordinance, is fundamentally flawed. All improvements are cosmetic until you can establish the foundation. The suspension of the commission should not be looked at as punishment, but as a preventive measure to stop sending complainants through a flawed process. Suspension of the complete process is the right thing to do at this point. Thank you.
Nora Diane and Mike Gomez. Councilor Benton.
I have a question for Mr. Valdez.
Mr. Valdez.
Mr. Valdez, so when you say suspension of the complete process, what do you propose be done in the interim with complaints?
I propose that the whole process, sending complaints, the whole thing just be put on hold. And the reason, no complaints. The reason being that the city, unfortunately, has put itself in this position. Unfortunately, with the creation of the POC and how it was created against our objections, was the beginning of a blood process, and now we're in a predicament, and the only...
Sure, I understand that. I understand your perspective on that.
Yes, sir.
But what I'm talking about is a practical matter, Mr. Valdez. Practical matter. How long are you aware of the system that's being proposed as, I mean, because the process, you know, is not going to go away. That may be your desire, but
No.
that's not going to happen tonight. What's going to happen tonight if this passes is that process is going to be totally without a public hearing process, which I know that you and many people are appreciate at least the hearing, and, you know, despite problems that have occurred. So there would be no hearing process. We'd be talking about, as I understand it, Ms. Mason, it's administration-appointed hearing officers that would be handling this.
I'm going to defer to Mr.
Mr.
Zaman.
Yeah, respond to your...
Mr. President, Council Benton, ultimately, that would be the case. The CPCs, the citizen police complaints, would continue to be received. The IRO would investigate them, would look into them, make a determination, speak with the chief. Ultimately, if there was disagreement, then the appeals would be through the CAO, and I understand that the CAO is intending to hire those
Be in charge of hiring
hearing officers.
the interim hearing officer, as we're going to call it. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's, Councilor Arnold Jones.
Just a quick clarification, John. A citizen only has 90 days to file a complaint, is that correct? Under
Mr.
current
President?
ordinances?
Councilor Arnold Jones, yeah, the citizen has 90 days to file the complaint with the city from the date of the incident. That includes weekends. After that, the complaint is considered to be invalid.
And in terms of timeframes, because I think we're getting down to a problem of timeframes here, how long does the city then and the POC have to respond?
Once the complaint is considered to be valid, that becomes an administrative investigation under the collective bargaining agreement, and that has to be completed within a 90-day period. There is a provision in extraordinary cases for an additional 30 days. So basically, at the outside, the city would have 120 days to resolve the investigation.
So if, based on listening to Mr. Valdez, if there was a suspension, once we go beyond 90 days, we could be limiting a citizen's right to actually bring forth a case. Is that correct? And do we have that problem in time?
Mr. President, Councilor Arnold Jones, the way the bill is drafted, we don't have that problem because the bill just suspends the operation of the POC, not the entire CPC process. If, however, we were going to come in and say, no more CPCs, we're going to suspend the entire operation, then after each incident, after that 90-day period elapsed, that lose their opportunity to comply.
Councilor Sanchez.
The question I have then, John, basically with O-13-51, that would give the IRO and the police chief the authority to make that decision and would eliminate the citizens from being involved in that process. Is that correct? The POC, members of the POC.
Mr. President, Councilor Sanchez, that's correct. The public airing portion would be gone. Would, under the current ordinance, the IRO and the police chief confer and agree to disagree. It's only if they disagree that the public aspect of it kicks in at the POC.
And the biggest issue for the city on the radar screen are the number of police shootings. Regarding the police shooting, would those be heard by the IRO and the police chief, and the citizens would also be left out, the POC?
Mr. President, Councilor Sanchez, with your permission, I'd defer that to the IRO or someone on the admin side.
I'm sorry, Counselor, I wasn't.
The question was regarding the suspension of the POC and issues regarding police shootings in this community. Would then the police chief and yourself be the ones to make those decisions, which would eliminate the members of the POC, is that correct?
Mr. President, Counselor Sanchez, I read the ordinance as written to have to give no authority to the independent review office to review officer-involved shootings in this time of suspension. What the ordinance does is give the independent review office the authority to continue to review citizen police complaints, which are complaints filed by citizens against individual officers for perceived and actual misconduct of officers while on duty. The purpose of those citizen police complaints conducted in a timely manner enables the city, through the police chief, to actually impose discipline on officers who conduct misconduct while on duty or off duty even, which is brought to the attention of the department through the citizen police complaint process. A complaint which would otherwise not be even known to the department for misconduct by an officer, but through that complaint. So it's shutting down the entire process, would be shutting down the avenue for citizens to have a grievance against the department through the citizen police complaint process.
Thank you.
Let's move on to our last few speakers. Ms. Anand.
Councilman, President Lewis, thank you for considering suspending the POC that has obviously not been working. Example, the case of Mr. Ken Ellis, who was given awarded $13 million. IRO is the next important factor needed to be considered suspending only because one cannot be able to function without the other. It would be a skeleton crew. Being in the trenches is when our children and friends and family are falling down and getting killed. That's being in the trenches. The authority to investigate is the least that can be done when the IRO or the POC were doing their work, should I say. Basically, one thing more important that I needed to say, consoling is not what the people needed when their children are dying and their relatives are dying. What was really needed, what's really important to know and understand is that they needed the truth. They needed to know exactly what had happened. They need to know the whole incident as it was, purely and simple. People are just crying out because they are not given the exact details of the murders of their children. And that is what is very, very appalling to the people. They need to know what exactly has happened. If they could only give them that, that's all they would have needed. And that's what my family needed. The truth.
Mr. Gomez.
I'd like to pick up on that. And that's very true, because when my kid was killed, I didn't get a phone call. Nothing. I had to find out from his aunt and my son who watched him get killed. So, yeah, the only thing they left us was the mess to clean up and the funeral bill to pay. So, yeah, that's very true. And another thing that's true is that the MGT study, well, it sounds like it's just being picked through, you know, like what APD wants to do, you know, and what they don't. What's gonna hurt them, they're not gonna do, you know. But, you know, what's gonna be a token thing to show us, well, that's gonna be okay. Go ahead and do that. And other cities have police unions, and they have a strong POC, so that shouldn't be an excuse. We can, if they can make it work, make it work. And the question of all this is maybe political. I mean, it seems like it always is. Maybe Mayor Barry, maybe Jay McCluskey, maybe somebody's pulling your strings, right? But to take away citizens and the person who's going to be oversighting everything directly and being commanded by Barry and Schultz, that's not right. And I hope the DOJ is listening to this. I hope they're watching this and seeing what's happening here. The smoke screen that's being put up, making it look like that, you know, you're trying to do something while you're just taking away more citizens' rights. Please take a look at this, because the new POC members, I've been watching them for 3 years now, and they're a lot better than what we had, you know, before. At least they're trying. So just keep the public in mind. That's what we're here for, is to help us.
All right, back to the bill, discussion, questions. Councilor Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the whole point when we started this, because I do agree, the whole process, it does not work. And